we're talking about paper piecing. I'm kind of including foundation piecing. We've talked about that before, but foundation piecing, I just want to mention it's similar. Sometimes you'll have those terms used just willy-nilly and be like, is that paper piecing or foundation piecing? And so to distinguish them, what I will say today is foundation piecing is simply when I use that term, I talk about it in terms of giving something more stability. So it's simply using a piece of paper or a piece of muslin or something like that on which to sew your fabric, but not necessarily to have a complex pattern that's arranged and determined and fitting together perfectly and that kind of thing. So foundation piecing, I reference that as when you do strip quilts, for example. So this is newsprint that I bought on a roll from the Missoulian in the old days when I don't know if you can still do that, but used to be able to go down there and they had piles of rolls all over the place. And so I have a really big one that'll last me a lifetime and then some. And so I just cut squares and then start sewing. And so you can see the sewing lines. I just put one strip down the middle and right sides together, sewed them on the fabric side to the foundation. So I'll demonstrate that real quickly just so you see the difference. Good, we're all plugged in. Foundation piecing, as I reference it, is not precise. It is simply, like I said, it's just simply to give something that can be a little less stable. It gives that stability. So, should have done this, sorry. Here we go, and here, weird little piece of thread there. Okay, so on my foundation, the paper, it's cut slightly bigger than the square that I would want it to be in the end. So this is I think 7-inch or so, 7-inch square, hey? And so now, and I just have 1.5 and 1-inch strips and 2-inch strips and bags in my sewing room that I just grabbed from. I love sewing truly random. I just grab one and go. And I finger press, but you can iron. The paper will be fine with that. And so I'm using my 1/4 inch-ish. When I paper piece and foundation piece, I often use a little narrower seam allowance than 1/4 inch. Not a whole lot, but a little. And then once I get off, now I'm gonna say something about this feature on my machine. You don't have to have it. I sewed forever without it, and you don't have to have it, but this is my newer machine, and I have thread cutter. And I'm here to tell you that when you're sewing on paper or foundation, or the pattern is part and it's a huge something that's going through your machine, so you're not just dealing with 2 pieces of fabric, having that thread cutter is really nice because you're not pulling it out and having a long string and then it's hanging off the edge of your piece as you're sewing other things to it. So it is really sweet, but not necessary. So just so you know. Then I do a little finger press here, but to show you, the other thing with paper piecing is you want I think it's effective to have everything right here. So yeah, I have my hot iron, I'm ready to roll. I press that open. Ooh, that gave me a start. And then I'm going to put this piece on. So right sides are to the fabric, and then I line it up just as if I were sewing it without foundation. However, because all the edges are going to be on the bias cut for this particular type of block, then it's nice to have that foundation to hold them together. And it's also nice to give you a framework to go, oh, I have to have a piece that goes that far. And so now I have this, and I love this little mat. They're old, June Taylor made them. I think you guys carry them here. The other side's a cutting board. And so you just, or a cutting mat, so you just, cutting board's in the kitchen. Cutting mat is here. And I have 2 rotary cutters when I'm sewing with paper piecing because paper dulls your blades. So if you are actually trimming on the outside of the paper, which at this point I am, I'm going to use my fabric blade. But once I start having to trim that paper off, or you'll see when I do true paper piecing, that you're cutting the actual paper, I use my paper blade. And that's important, or you're going to end up with your blade being really dull and not happy with that. So this piece of paper becomes my guide at this point. And I'm just gonna, I'm not being real careful. I'm not measuring perfection. That comes later. And we've done strip piecing on these videos before, so if you look back in those, this was a technique that we demonstrated, but it wasn't for the purpose of explaining foundation piecing as much as it was the strip piecing. So then you have this sweet little deal, and there's a pot holder. I always talk about how, if nothing else, you have a pot holder. But when you put 4 of these together, then your angles make a diamond. So we did strip piecing before. If you use the same strip down the middle, that I meant to get that in a little different position, but anyway, if you make this with the black in the middle, then when you if you do that with all of them, you'll have this interior diamond that gets made with the black that looks like sashing, but it's not, because it won't line up perfectly, but it'll be an impression of the outline. So if you look up string piecing and look up that on Pinterest, you'll find tons of possibilities, but that's how it works. So first you cut your paper, so that's your foundation. You lay your center strip down, right sides together with the second strip, fold it open, the next one right sides together, fold it open, and so forth to work out to the corner. Yeah?
Yeah, but if you put your center in,
then you go back to this side and you do it that way. Yeah. So then, good question. So then you just flip over to the open side of that center strip and go to the outside. You can go from a corner and move all the way across. You can do that. But when you start in the middle, you've got your biggest piece and you're going to your smallest pieces. And so it's easier to manage as it gets more cumbersome with more fabric sewn on.
So when you say that you have everything in place, which is called mise en place, by the way, in cooking.
Oh! Mise en place.
Is to, you don't just randomly pull them out and say?
I do. Yeah. I randomly pull them from the bag, size, color,
so then
everything.
What you mean by having everything in place is just all the tools and everything?
Yes, all your tools are in place. So you have your cutting mat, your pressing mat. I have a little cutting mat here that I like as we do paper piecing, and I demonstrate that. You'll see how nice that is to have right there.
Use it, the mise en place thought is not because you've already selected.
No, correct. Fabric-wise, no. Fabric-wise, I'll get up and go find one and cut it, even if I think, you know what, I want red in there, and off I go. However, I'm sure I have it in the bucket. But if I want this middle strip to have a consistency with all the other blocks, then I would have plenty of that cut and ready, perhaps a pile of it here. But what I tend to do with strip quilts is go dark, and I'll find dark near black strips and call it good enough. And they're not all matching. I love string piecing, love it. I love scraps. It's my very favorite. So these little pieces obviously can just be tossed, but guess what? These little strips are going to be small enough for some of this, so they'll go right back in the bucket. And that's one of the things about using your scraps. It's like pulling rocks out of your garden. I swear they reproduce. And the next time you have more scraps than you did before. Like, this should be getting smaller, not larger. Another thing to use your scraps and foundation for is if on newsprint, or if you have a way to get a hold of adding machine tape. That's not really available anymore, I guess, but if you can get some at some used place, or some kind of recycling place. If you have adding machine tape, they'll be about 3 inches wide, but you can also use the newsprint and just cut long pieces. And then when you have your strips and you have a free moment, I just set it down, and this is how the randomness of it rolls. I just picked up the next one, and I'm going to set it down here, and I'm going to sew it to this. Don't have to be particularly careful about lining things up, but here we go, and here we go. And so if you're making a quilt and you saw a piano key border, and you'll notice it kind of curls a little. There's a different tension, obviously, on paper than there is, on paper than there is on fabric. So it does kind of bend a little bit. And I'll take my scissors or my cutter that I have right here and just cut that off. Throw this down. Eleanor Burns is visiting me right now. In case you haven't seen Eleanor Burns quilt in a day, she does this little toss of all. I'm going to flip this over to the pressing. So now I have these two pieces. I'm going to press them open, and then I'm going to take another one. Boom. Grab that. I don't care. Just random. I'm going to set this down. I might have this rolled up or something more convenient if I have a big old piece at home.
But because of your fabric choices, a lot of your scraps are they have some similarities.
No.
Right? No?
Mm-mm.
You can
No,
go
I
with
would,
different
yeah, look
textures
at this.
even.
Well, no, well, you could even, yeah, sure, absolutely. I mean,
I've
these are
inherited
little
So
strips.
many different strips. I'm like,
Yeah. These are little strips. They're not gonna distort after you put all of them together.
Okay.
It's gonna be fine.
Okay.
And yeah, this is this is a primitive fabric. It's African, and the weave is pretty loose. But that's the nice thing about using foundation, is it holds everything stable until you get strips sewn to this whole thing. And then you have a border ready to go. But you just keep that in the corner at your sewing machine, and when you've got strips from leftover binding, or you've got strips from leftover sashing a quilt, you just start sewing them onto this, and then leave it in the corner, and then sew on some more the next time, and sew on some more the next time. Then you're making a quilt, and you've got this big piece of piano keys that'll make a really nice little border. And however wide your piece is, that of course is how wide your border is. But if you didn't want such a big border, then cut this in half. And there you go. So it's a wonderful way to use scraps. You do want to be a little careful. There's one little trick that can happen with this, and that is, as I mentioned, that your fabric has a different tension and ease than the paper does. Oops. I'm not used to having a cutter on my machine, and I automatically start to take it off. So then I put this on my pressing mat, take my little iron, I don't have to even get up from my machine, and here I am, and I pressed it. Now let's take this one. It's kind of a weird color to have right next to that, but here we go. And that gets put on. Here we are. I should have rolled this up and put a rubber band around it or something. That probably would have been smart. There we go. Now it's a little more out of the way. And if your strips that are in your scrap basket aren't perfectly straight cut, that's okay too. Just lay them on the paper and kind of eyeball straight edge, and cover those little wows that you have with a nice straight seam. And
Would you trim then?
you can.
have to
You
trim.
can trim as you go. You can trim each one before you sew, whichever's easiest for you. So, oh, this is my paper. Oh, well, it may not cut very well. I'll push hard. There we go. Okay, so then that's cut. And guess what? I think I put that on the wrong side. Oh, well, that's okay too. Wrong side of fabric is often very pretty too. So sometimes that happens. Oh my gosh, just to be weird, I will choose, not allowed in my book, but I will choose a lime green and put that on. So then again, you have this, now we'll have the lime green there. That's gonna be kind of weird, but it's there and it's kind of fun. And when you get through all of this, you'll have neutrals, you'll have blacks and whites, you'll have tans and rusts and lime green and sky blue and other patterns. You might have calico prints. You might have a bold modern polka dot. That's okay. When it's all together, it's like looking at this quilt over here that has stripes in the fabric. I don't look at that and go, oh, what color is that one stripe? You know, that's not what you see. That's not what you notice. It's the effect of the whole thing surrounding a quilt. So if a scrappy border lends itself well to your quilt, this is a good thing to just have going in your sewing room all the time. And just keep sewing on it any old time. You can do 1 strip, 2 strips, 10 strips, take an hour all day, whatever. And just work on putting those added on. So this is your foundation. It is not my pattern. And that's the distinction I use in using the term foundation piecing and paper piecing. Now, you can also use a strip of muslin fabric if you wanted it for some reason to be sturdier. But this newsprint is great because, one, you don't actually have to take it off. It can be left on the quilt and washed. It'll disintegrate. And a lot of quilts in days gone past had newspaper as their foundation for string quilts and many other kinds of quilts. And those were just sewn right into the quilts. And if they were washed a lot, they just disintegrated and became part of the batting stuff. And it won't cause any problem. But if you want to tear it off as you get done, a little tip too with foundation and paper piecing, use a tinier stitch. So when you use a tinier stitch, it tears right off. And I did not reduce mine, so it didn't tear off super nicely. And that's why. But and then here's the nuisance of using paper foundation, and that is that if you decide you want to tear it off, then you have a little bit of work to do. It might be what you do watching TV, it might be what you do sitting out on the deck and listening to the birds, who knows? But that's how it comes apart. So if you want to tear it off, you can. Obviously, if you do muslin, you don't tear it off. It becomes part of. So foundation piecing simply gives stability. Now, paper piecing. Paper piecing is often really intimidating to people. For some reason, they've just gotten themselves all bothered by, it's so hard, it's so many steps. You know, it is. It's a lot of steps. It's much more complicated than the 4-patch or a 9-patch or a half square triangles and some of the basics of quilting. However, when you see a quilt like this and you go, oh my gosh, I love that. I want to make that. That isn't going to be an easy one to cut the shapes and sew them together. So the paper actually gives you the pattern, and you sew the fabric right to the pattern using the lines on the paper. Yes, it has a lot of steps. Yes, those steps are done a certain way and you'll be happier with your results. However, I would never undertake this by cutting templates and sewing them together. It wouldn't be as precise. The paper keeps you absolutely on the seams that are going to match with every piece. So in this magazine, there's a tear out section, and it gives you the pattern for that quilt. Now, there are pattern pieces in here. These pieces, by the way, go with that same pattern. Those are templates, and I am going to use those to just cut around and use that in fabric as the pattern, just like you would do with dressmaking. But this is actually a paper pieced section. And paper piecing uses either letters or numbers to indicate the first piece you sew on, the second piece you sew on, and so forth. So you just paint by number. You just follow, or letter. So you just follow the order, and all you have to know is 2 comes after 1, B comes after A, and that's about it. So I went to my copy machine and I copied this, and then I cut out the exterior dotted lines. Now that's where I used my paper only rotary cutter to cut these out. And now I have it's not a template in the sense that we think of templates, you cut out the edge of it. This is the pattern for what I'm going to sew. So the very first thing I do is I, of course, have to decide my fabric like any quilt. And what I decided was I decided to use this print as the background and this print as the flying geese. So I have these two fabrics going together. So the first thing I'm going to do, and I always have, especially when I'm trying to explain it to somebody, is I have to go, see, is that right? But once you get in the routine of it, then you're good. So the first thing you have to do is figure out how you want to cut your fabrics to be ready. So if you'll notice, this A and this piece of fabric aren't the same size. The A has to be bigger, at least by 1/4 inch margins. A little more is even better. So, but not real excessive. You don't want a ton of extra. So what you have to do is first go to your fabrics and kind of think, okay, what's going to be the easiest way to cut these? Well, these are triangles. All of the pieces are triangles, which means that if I cut strips of fabric, I meant to bring those, but I didn't. So this height is under 2.5 inches. So I just cut 2.5 inch strips of both these fabrics, and then folded and had that, and then I used my. I love this little ruler, by the way. It's an absolute essential. It's just a 1 inch by 6, I think. Yeah, 6 inches long. And I just set this down on my fabric, and I line up my 1/4 inch line to the fold of the paper and then cut the edge. So it gives me that extra 1/4 inch. And then here on the edge of the fabric, that's already built in, so I just can cut here. But I can open that up and cut here. And I'm cutting on my 2 inch strips. Then I can cut the other way and save fabric so that this triangle goes that way and this way and that way. And then I'm cutting those out. So to make one block, I'm going to need 4 of these. So I cut enough for 2 of these blocks. And the A fabric, this center, it has the only edge that is included of that 1/4 inch is on the bottom. So I have to remember to add the 1/4 inch, and then this side add the 1/4 inch here when I cut. So sometimes, like if you get patterns from Quiltworks almost always, Quiltworks almost always has paper piecing patterns. So I have a couple here to show you. I can pass them around and you can take a look. Feel welcome to open them and look at them. These two are the same. I'll send them here and here. But her patterns, so if you look at this back design, one, they have angles that are like, no, thank you, I'm not going to figure those out and cut the pieces. But if I have the paper, it's not hard. It's not hard. I won a blue ribbon at the quilt show actually this last month for one of her quilts that I made for my daughter's and her husband's wedding. This one, whoa, look at those teeny tiny rays. I don't want to cut those pieces and be accurate, but if I, and have to worry about being accurate, but if I cut them out, they're going to work much better. And what Quiltworks gives you is they give you pieces to use for cutting the pieces of fabric. You have to think about organization. And so, what's the word again for cooking and having everything?
Mise en place.
Mise en place. So you definitely want that. So you want all your patterns cut, put them in baggies, label the baggies, make sure you know what's what and what order it goes in. So there is a lot of effort, but it's that old adage of you get back what you put in. And this is saved. I have significant ADHD and I'm a get-her-done quilter. I want to do it fast and I want to do it easy, and I have ways to make it look less easy, more complicated, and that's great. But every once in a while I do want to make something with more complexity. As you can tell, I have more patterns that have stimulated my thoughts about what I wanted to make than I've used. Those haven't been opened. But this one has. And this one is a Quiltworks pattern, and it's these little fan pointy rays that come out. And so you do have to organize everything. If you decide to take on something like this, please feel welcome to contact me. I'd be glad to try and help you. But also in Missoula, we have Vita Anderson, who's a certified Quiltworks instructor, and she knows her stuff. I've taken a class from her, and it was fabulous. It was actually that table runner. This is one I made, and I brought it in before in one of our videos, and it's a snowflake table runner. I actually have it on my wall up high, but this is the pattern. Wah!
Do you ever use your your copy machine?
Yeah. And when you do, you always want to make sure your size that got printed matches the
Right, 'cause,
pattern.
I mean,
Sometimes
could you
they're
mess
off.
around with the size? and
Yes,
make it
yes,
bigger and
you could if you want to make it bigger or smaller. Absolutely,
Yeah.
absolutely. And so when you think about this, for example, you might think, whoa, those are really tiny, that's overwhelming. Each snowflake has over 126 pieces, but it wasn't hard. When I show you the routine that you get into to do it, it's not, you get into the rhythm of it and you get rolling. It is amazing. And the reward is that you get to create something far more complex and have it match. Have it line up, because it's exactly the pattern that it's supposed to be. And that's the joy of it. I don't do it often. I'm not the expert in paper piecing, but I do know how, and I've had some wonderful, wonderful teachers. And I would strongly recommend that if you're going to take this on, that my introduction to it isn't your platform to just go get them, unless that's who you are, and that's okay. You might be just fine. But I was going to show you. Oh, okay. So this is one wedge of a 6-sectioned snowflake, and in that there's 24 pieces. So that's 132 pieces, I think. And if you'll see, one is here. So you start with 1. 2 gets sewn on next. You put that down and sew 2. You put 3 down and sew 3. And so you just keep following the lines on the pattern. And that's it. It's spelled out for you, and you're there. And if you make a mistake, one of the things that can be a little tricky is if you make a mistake, you don't want your children around when that happens. But anyway, certainly not your grandchildren. But you might end up having sewn on this paper and sewn on the line, and now you have to take it out, and you've sewn this teeny tiny stitch so it's easy to tear. Yay. No, not yay. It might tear. That's okay. Put a piece of tape over it and sew again. It's fine. It's not the end of the world. if you sew a piece and you flip it over, which I'll get to, and it doesn't quite cover the space you thought it was going to cover, that's okay. You can get by with little teeny spots here and there because this piece of paper is going to hold it all stable. And then it'll get quilted and it'll hold it all down. So perfection, it gives us the illusion that we are perfect. How fun. So, oh, thank you. Whoa, I'm getting caught all over the place. Doing a merry-go-round on the chair here. There we go. So this pattern has pieces I have made, and so they're all cut out, and you can really see how the pieces look. Okay, what's another reason? So complexity, tiny pieces, that's another reason to use paper piecing. Another is where you have curves and points, and you want them to end up in the right place. And while on the paper, you wouldn't necessarily sew a curved line, you might sew this section and then take the paper off and then fit this curve into the next piece just as you would sew a curve anyway. So your curve is going to be just the right size and angle and everything. So the perfection of it is really quite impressive. These were blocks I got at the Senior Citizen Center. I'm so excited. And they were paper piece. It's a Quiltworks pattern that I've actually made, but not in these colors. And so if you look, you can see where the paper has been torn off and there's little fragments of it still hanging around. And you can also see where maybe something didn't quite go all the way to the edge or whatever. There's room to make mistakes. Take a look at that. Wow. There you go. I don't know yet. I think I'm going to make a small quilter wall hanging because there's only so many blocks, and I do have the pattern, so I could make more. But quite honestly, I've made my share of that particular block, and I'm done. So I think I'll find ways to put them together and fill in or something. I don't know. So yeah, it's the classic sewing room dilemma of all the stuff you have that you've never used and probably won't live long enough to. So here, there's another thing about teeny tiny piecing to keep in mind. So log cabins can be done by cutting strips with your rotary cutter, cutting them the length they need to be, and sewing them together, the pieces. You start out with 2 squares, sew those, then you have an edge that gets sewn on maybe either side if you're doing courthouse steps, or else you go in a rotation around with longer and longer strips. That's all manageable by measure. This teeny tiny one would be hard to be precise. And you might, if you were making a larger piece out of little squares like this, you might have a lot of trimming, and then your outside strips will have quite a bit of variable in width because you'll be trimming them down or wanting to add another strip on or something like that. So using paper piecing is a way to perfect that so that you can stay super precise. Again, use your paper-only rotary cutter, cut out these individual squares, and then you'll sew right onto it, and I'll show you how. Then here, this is a wonderful book. It's really old, so I'm not sure that it's even available anymore. Don't even know Quilter's Resource. It was some store that I went to. But Shirley Libby, I believe is the author's name. Kids Can Paper Piece. And the nice thing about this book is A, it gives you amazing instructions, and B, it starts you out with nice big pieces. So this apple block is this paper pieced. And it starts out with 1, you start with the stem, then you sew the sides 2 and 3 onto either side of the stem. 4 is this, so then you sew that edge. 5 and 6 are these corners. Is there a different way to do that? Yes, there is. This isn't the only way, but if you started out with something like this, if you've never done paper piecing before, this will give you the routine of it with pieces that are manageable. Honestly, I think I would do for a first one, I wouldn't do this because this large piece and these tiny pieces connected to it, sometimes what happens is that large piece gets kind of poofy. It doesn't get real flat when you're sewing the other seams down. And then when you take the paper off, it kind of spreads out. So there's a cute little house block in here. Well, and this umbrella, here's the umbrella, here's the actual one, not quite so big. That's kind of fun. In paper piecing, you can sew little slivers around an edge and have it be absolutely round, absolutely curved round. And it's really fun. But this gives an illusion of round, so it's good. Here's a house block. Here's the sewing. Now, could you cut those pieces out in strips? Yes. Could you sew these 2 together and then put these 2 on like a log cabin? Absolutely. Could you reduce this block and make teeny tiny houses? Yes. That'd be super fun. So, so the nice thing about this book here is it does give some easy starts for learning the process for paper piecing. It has incredibly specific instructions, and then you can play with, gosh, what if I reduce it? I don't think I'd enlarge any of these, but and then what is the system that works for me? Where do I want all my stuff? I wish I could tell you that at home things look a lot more orderly, but they don't. And paper piecing is chaotic in my life. I tend to get my piles knocked on the floor and have to reorganize, and I'm sure there are better ways to do it. But I'm here to tell you that I finished some big quilts that were paper pieced and still have that tendency. So, okay, it works. Another thing, New York Beauty is kind of what QuiltWorks uses as a format for them. Come over here in the camera. So New York Beauty is a radiant compass looking thing where it's a quarter circle and rays that come off of it, a curve there. And then the variations of it are another row of smaller, shorter rays, or a solid band, or some things like that. So they change up quite a bit. But New York Beauties and then curved flying geese. Curved flying geese is also a wonderful application for paper piecing. And these are fun books. I mentioned the log cabin, and this is a Beyond the Log Cabin, and it has all these fun log cabins, and I'll just I'll send this book around. But you can see that when you start to go into diamond shapes versus the standard right angle squares for log cabins, then you're going to get tricky on making those all fit together right. And so if you want it to match up, now there's improv sewing, which if you do an improv log cabin block and you just grab a strip from your scraps and sew it together and it's going to be whatever shape it is, then that's different. But this is about making those diamonds all match, so then you get a wonderful kaleidoscope effect. Let me find some completed project pictures here. I know there are some. Here you go, like these. But that doesn't happen if you do improv. So, I mean, something else happens and it's wonderful, but these are really tiny strips and they're angled in such a way that you get all kinds of secondary curves and secondary diamond shapes and things like that. So, yeah, this one. So log cabin can be very simple. Cut strips, sew them together. Or they can be super tiny, or they can change the angle, or you can get into all kinds of other complexities that knowing how to paper piece is going to be your ticket to making it work. So how do we do paper piecing? So we have our pattern cut. We have all of our pieces larger than the pattern, all cut. And I have mine stacked so that my A, C, E, and G are the geese in a flying geese. And then these sides are the background. And so I have those here.
Do you have to pay attention to grain, cross grain and bias?
You know, that's a nice thing with paper piecing. You really don't. You really don't. I would bet that some people would hear my statement and go, yeah, but then. So anytime you have one edge that's on a grain line cross or straight of grain, you're going to have a more stable edge to sew on. But the reason we do paper piecing is because we have weird angles. So something's going to be off, no matter how you do it. And by having the paper, it stabilizes that. So it's far less of an issue, far less. Okay, so you need a good light in your sewing area. Perhaps even your sewing machine light will be good enough. But you want to take your piece and you're going to set it down like this. I got to get these right here, I think. Yes, here we go. Now I cut these. These are the background pieces. I cut these in the way first I cut my 2.5-inch strip, and then I set one of these pattern shapes on top of it and made a rough cut in that triangle. And because it's folded in half, that strip, I'm getting mirror images. So I'm cutting 2 for 1. Does that make sense? So now I have these 2, and they're going to go here. So I'm going to lay that out so that I keep my orientation. I'm going to take the middle one, I'm going to hold it up to the light, and I'm going to look through the fabric. Make sure that my fabric comes above that sewing point. Make sure that the fabric comes outside the edge of the actual block and outside all the points. So there's that. I'm going to flip it over, and these are oriented so they're in the right direction, and I'm going to lay this one down right on that edge. And I'm going to start there. Now, I'm going to slide it over because that's a little bit of a wide seam. And I don't know that this is showing up. There we go. Did that show up to you guys? So right here on this side, you can see the shadow of the fabric, and you can see that I've got a 1/4-inch seam, I can slide that over even a little bit more. Paper piecing allows me to use a scant 1/4 inch. So I'm going to set it like that. Now, when that's, you'll see that it's a sewing line. These lines are sewing lines. So when that sewing line intersects another one, you want to end your stitch right at that intersection, maybe 1 or 2 stitches only beyond it. So you're not going to go way off, as far off as the fabric is, for example. But down here in the outside seam allowance, you are. So you're going to follow that line starting there, all the way off the edge. Starting here, all the way off the edge. If, because the positioning is better for me to start this way, I'll start off the edge, come to here, and take maybe 1 or 2 extra stitches is all. Okay? So the first one, another tool I have is this piece of plastic. You could use a postcard. You could use a business card if you're doing something really small, or a larger business card. You could use a thick magazine cover, but you want a thin piece of something that is firm enough to hold its edge, and you use this for a folding guide. And I put it down. I don't want to burn myself on that. You put it down on the line. So my line is just showing ever so teensy bit beyond my card. And I fold there. Then I'm going to come to this one. And I'm going to fold there. So I'm folding toward the printed side. Okay, toward me on the printed side. And I'm going to fold the next 2 or 3 lines. I don't like to fold the whole thing first. I like to just go a couple lines ahead, is all. Yeah. Oh, I thought you had a question. Nope. Okay. So now I have another way to check. One, I have the light. I'll go back here and go right there. Make sure my fabrics are lined up, yes. But I also can fold that over and see that I have a seam allowance. Okay, so I'm going to hold everything really still. And if I come into my machine and the cat jumps up at me and I lose my pressure on my hold, I might have to go back to step A and start all over. So I'm going to come.
You can pin it if you want.
You can. I don't like to pin paper piecing because I don't like to pin, first of all. I hardly ever use my pins. Pins create a buckle, and paper doesn't give like fabric. So when you pin, you have to be really cognizant of pinning only to hold it to start. Pull your pin out, flatten everything down, and then sew. But I don't like to. Now, someone, like I said, may hear my little recording here and go, oops, I didn't reduce my stitching. I went, that's going. So I'm coming down to 1/5 on my, there, okay. Oops, cut. And take it off. Then I have this. I'm going to press it. So you have everything right here at your fingertips. Then I'm going to fold this other side of the geese, the rust color. I'm going to put it down here on my cutting mat, and my little tiny ruler went. Where'd my little tiny ruler go? Oh, shoot. This is what happens to me. Okay. Somewhere around here. At least at home I'm a little more habitual, but if I take it over here, You can use any ruler, but, oops, that, okay. Okay, I'll blame you. No. I'm always telling my husband, well, good, we know who to blame. This under here. Somewhere around here is my little tiny ruler. Where did it go? I know, I just had it. Oh, maybe it's in my box. No. Oh, but look, I have another one. Yay. Okay, we're good. Okay, so this is the one I sewed. Okay, so I fold it over to do the next one. I lay my ruler down, and I'm going to hold this up if I can to show you. I'm going to trim a scant 1/4 inch. Oops, sorry. I'm going to trim a scant 1/4 inch. So I have my 1/4 inch line is just a little bit on the paper fold. Okay. Now my fabric rotary. And trim that off. Okay, so now I have this. And I go back and I find my little piece. Oh, I think I had another little piece somewhere. Anyway, this will work. And it's going to go here. And I'm going to fold this over, line it up because I've trimmed that just the way I want it. And I'm going to
And
come.
in a lot of these patterns, do they tell you what fabric you're going to need? What,
Yes.
How many pieces?
Yes.
They
Yes.
will?
Yes.
If you, okay.
Yes.
Okay, so-
If you are using a pattern, not something you've invented, which do that and every now and then regret it, but nonetheless, okay. And so maybe you can. I made a mistake. No, I didn't. Oh, good. Whew. All right. I thought I sewed the other one closed on it. All right, press that open. And now I have this. Okay? Can you see how absolutely lovely that little point is at the top? I mean, it's just so sweet. And perfect. At that first level, I'm going to have the next one. So now I'm going to go, I've done A, I've done the 2 B's. So now I'm going to have C. So C is going to go here, but it's going to go here. And remember that you have to sew C down all by itself. Don't start doing D's on it because this seam at the bottom won't be done. In case you can't tell, I did that. So now I'm going to fold this bottom of C, and I'm going to trim. Oh man, I made that kind of skimpy. Okay, this is a good example though. So you can see here, I've got just a little teeny hair there of, let me see if you see that. That's just pretty small. And I wouldn't go any smaller than that, but that will work. And so I will take this, and I'm actually going to have the rust go a little beyond the other, just so I have a little bit more for the thread to latch into. And flip that over, come here. And I'm off the edge of the pattern, so I'm going to start all the way off the edge. Oops, not quite there. And, ooh, that's skimpy, but it's okay. there's that. And I know it's okay because I can see that the fabric goes beyond there, beyond the lines. Now, I'm gonna move these, so here are my D's. First, I'm gonna take my card, I'm gonna fold the next 3 lines or so. So I lay it right on that black line. And then here's where those stitches that go beyond, you have to kind of break them loose. So I pulled that loose, come to this side, let that down, and see how it wants to pull around like that? I can pull that loose. And in this I need to trim my 1/4 inch, scant 1/4 inch. Like that. Move this, trim. Like that. And then I have my pieces here. So this is going to go here, and this is going to go here. Line them up, like so. When I look through the paper, I can see that they're beyond the line. And it gives me opportunity to sew. I'm going to start just a few stitches above the intersection, but in the outside edge I'll go all the way on. And
Be nice if your table was out a little bit more, so you could just.
yeah, I
like
actually
that.
at home I do have that. I
Yeah.
have kind of a U-shaped sewing
Mhm.
area, and it's very nice. It's very
Mhm.
nice. Press that. Come over to this side. And on these triangles, they're pretty, this long, I don't know, it seems like that's the longer edge. I cut them, I think, ample, that if I didn't get the right edge where it needed to be, it'd be enough to hold, but maybe not. So, and if you can't tell, this is just the way I roll with sewing. It's like intuitive. So right here, if you can see through light, you can see through the paper, you can see the shadow of the fabric lining up. Come back here, lift up. And some people actually chain sew paper piecing. And the interesting thing about that, I have done it when I did my snowflakes, I chain sewed. And the interesting thing is because you're sewing so many pieces exactly the same, you get really good at that intuitive part of it is like, oh, I know this. Because every time I line up that piece, it's got to look like this. And I'm not getting mixed up on like this triangle being longer and is that angle right, and you know, and going through each one. So I don't paper piece enough to feel competent at chain piecing right on the fly, but
So you're chain piecing within the one pattern?
you
or
have
can
you have
change
all your
patterns
patterns
and chain
doing the
piecing your
same
patterns,
piece,
yeah.
and so you're
Right.
sewing the very same
I can see that,
section
sure.
on the same piece. Because you have this larger piece that you're maneuvering in your sewing machine, it gets a little cumbersome, and as it rolls off the back of your machine, they kind of get lumped together. But they're sewn together. It's not like things are falling apart. So, yeah. So it is a cool way to do it. Okay. So this is just the same all the way up. So now I fold that down I'll put the E on, I'll fold those two in this one, and fold the F, so the F's on, put the G, H, H. So then, I'll end up with something ready, like this, and ready for the last one. So the last one, we'll do here. So, wait. And I'm not trimming any on the outside perimeter of the pattern piece. I don't do that till the end.
So what is the end result of the pattern that you're working on? Is that going to be a star?
It's
Oh,
this.
that's,
I know,
yeah,
it's really pretty. And one would have to be cognizant of the color combinations all through that, because there's a couple variations there. So I'd need to go back and count those up, but I was just going, oh, I gotta get a sample ready for class. So here we are. So this is the last one. And as you can see, this piece is quite a bit bigger than, you know, than the pictured piece, but that's okay. I've got this edge trimmed, so I'm gonna line this up. And with triangles like this, I might wanna mark center, not to be exact, but just to kind of get it above here.
Suzanne, I'm sorry to interrupt, did your mic fall off?
Did my mic fall off? It sure did.
Sorry.
Sorry. I'm just such a funny person with all this. And then I'm stepping off it. Okay, here we go. How's that? Good? Thank you. Thanks for checking. Sorry, folks watching. Okay. I just intuitively did this, but if I just set that down and come back in a rush, I might not realize that this needs to be smoothed out a little bit and moved out. And so it might actually get kind of a bubble. I'll over accentuate that. And so that's one of the things in paper piecing, like I mentioned with the kids book, a bigger piece has a tendency to bubble up a little bit. So getting it nice and flat is good. You can make your pattern out of freezer paper, and then that, when you have the waxy side as you're pressing, sticks to the fabric and holds it in place. And you can run freezer paper through your copy machine, so that's an option too. All right, so now we'll come here. We'll go off the edge on the pattern.
What about parchment paper?
Yes, yes. I don't think parchment paper has as much of a sticky side to it as freezer paper does. But parchment paper would work. Okay, so now I've got my piece here. Oh, I got a little globular right there on the end. I thought I felt it doing that. I have a little, that long tip got kind of gunked up here. Gunk, gunk, don't like gunk. I'll fix it later. Anyway. There. Okay, I'm going to trim that little sucker right off. Okay, now we'll press this up. Yeah, a small iron is nice with this stuff because
but it has no steam.
it could, yeah, I could fill here with water. And you can get a couple different kinds. I'm not sure what you guys have in the small irons, but
We have some small Elisa irons.
okay, yeah,
The little-
all right.
And they're both funky.
So then I'd have this one here, I'd fold these two down, trim that, fold this down, trim that, and then I'd end up with this. Now as you can see on the back, all of that is uneven. So now comes the last step of trimming the whole piece. And this is really a nice thing about putting the seams together. And this is where I might actually have a little trouble keeping to my paper versus fabric because you kind of get a little of both there. But as much as you can, trimming accurately. And where you've pieced, if your fabric didn't quite go to the edge, it's okay because you have a line for sewing your seam. So when you have another piece like this put together, so we'll say this one's done and trimmed, you would line these up. Let's say they go together, they don't, but if they were to go together, you'd have, this would be your seam line. And you just follow that, and it should open up then for all your points to be lined up and perfect and right where they're supposed to be. So paper piecing, the whole thing about doing paper piecing is it gives you tremendous control to make things be successful. And if you've listened to or been to any of my talks, I am a good enough, it'll be fine, it passes the rollerblade at a block distance test, and you're good. To me, quilting is full of happiness. I love touching fabric. I love looking at fabric. I love sewing them together. And if that process is ruined by my going, oh, that doesn't look right, it doesn't match, then I'm not a happy camper. Now, I don't have a temperament that strives to do perfection. I know people who do, though, and that gives them pleasure. If that gives you pleasure, go for it and learn paper piecing inside out. But I hope that anyone who's learning to quilt through my guidance is learning to first and foremost enjoy it, and first and foremost love quilting, love sewing, love fabric, love the sisterhood of being with others who do too. So don't beat yourselves up. That's an order. So this is paper piecing. This is a full block, and as I mentioned, this curved piece was paper pieced. Then the paper was taken off, and this chunk was paper pieced, and the paper was taken off. And then you just sew a curve like you would sew a curve anywhere. So then those two pieces come together. So sometimes you'll have paper piecing where the whole thing is one paper piece to another paper piece sewn together, and sometimes you'll be taking paper off before that. And then, as I said, at some point, if you're using something thin like newsprint, my printer won't accept that, so it gets all crinkled up and jammed. But I used to have a printer who liked printing on that, and we had a great relationship. But anyway, and I always used newsprint for paper piecing. But if you don't have that option and you're using copy paper, that's a little thick to leave in your quilt. So I would recommend taking it out. Whew, paper piecing. It's fun. I do love it. It takes a mental readiness, though. It's not, if I'm like, I just have to quilt today, I'm not going to sit down and paper piece. That's not going to be my go-to. I know people who do, though, and they're really good at it and really familiar. So
Points, though. I spend a lot of time redoing when my points don't line up. So there's.
I know, and they do. It's really fulfilling because everything you sew goes straight onto this pattern and it matches that pattern. It's really a very fulfilling outcome, I think. But don't give yourself grief over it. And if in undertaking this, if you have any questions at all, you folks who are local feel welcome to call me or text me or whatever contact we have through the YouTube. Those who are watching, don't hesitate to leave comments and we'll see about getting back to you. So.
Have you made it like, I can't think of the specific names, but, or feathered star?
Yes. Oh, thank you. Feathered Star, I actually have a book I brought. Yes. So this is called Pine Burr. This design, this block is called Pine Burr. But like a feathered star, it has little tiny triangles on the outside edge. And thanks for saying that. And this shows the actual, like there's a pattern in the book for printing off the strips. And the cool thing, unlike sewing, you could sew a bunch of half square triangles together, but then you will be dealing with a bias edge for sure. And this is the pattern right here. So you just print off a bunch of these, sew straight to that. These are super easy to use because you just go 1, 2, 3, you just move right along and you just flip, 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 flip. Yeah, so they're very easy to use for feathered star.
Your flying geese on the border of this one is going to be paper piecing as well too.
It could, or I probably would not. I probably would do a measurement and cut and make flying geese separately. I prefer to sew directly with the fabric to fabric. Mm-hmm. And if things are at right angles and straight line up, that's probably where I'm going to go for making my measurements. But then again, as I look at that, the measurement that they all have to fit into might be 73 1/4, and trying to figure out what size to make those flying geese could be really, really difficult. So I might very well choose to do paper pieced. Yeah. So it's about getting things to work, getting things to fit, and getting that precision without having to be mad at yourself about it. So, yeah, so enjoy sewing, enjoy quilting. Questions? All right, that wraps us up. I have to say, I'm like, phew, this is, to me, paper piecing is enough effort for me to focus my very popcorny brain, and then to teach it is like, okay, gotta have some flow, some system. I don't want people leaving this lecture going, well, now I'm really mixed up. So thank you. Thanks for being here. It's fun. What? I can't remember what we have next time. I should say that probably at the end of each one. I never do. June. It says, oh, using orphan blocks. Oh, fun. That's a real one one, because that's like seat of your pants sewing. It's fun.
Just out of curiosity, because that's turned off now, right?
It's about to be.